Whoa! Another subpoena going out for none other than our favorite lady, Letitia James. I'm saying that facetiously, of course. I'll tell you, she's in all kinds of hot water right now. Really, really, really hot water. Letitia James getting dealt a new blow here as the mainstream media just deserts her. I mean, I couldn't believe what I was reading over the last couple of days. It's like nobody was covering this story, right? Just little old Trish Regan here on this show. Reminder, subscribe, share, like, all that good stuff. We're growing. And maybe it's because we're doing things that other people aren't. Here I was covering this story and it was like, where's the mainstream media on this? Nowhere. Crickets. Literally nothing. And then all of a sudden you're starting to see this groundswell. Why? Oh, because the woman is corrupt. I'm just going to say it, okay? I mean, this particular lawsuit really annoyed me from the get-go, even more than the others. I mean, they were all bad, right? But this one in particular, because it was so outrageous. And it's like the mainstream media is finally catching up to that idea. Check this out. In New York Magazine, pretty lefty New York Magazine, Letitia James is caught in a war of her own making. That's the headline, all right? And they're going on to say, it's a fact beyond reasonable dispute that Letitia James weaponized her official power as New York Attorney General to pursue Donald Trump for political purposes, all right? And I'm reading it straight from New York Magazine. Now, you've heard me say that, but when you start seeing the liberal media say that, that's actually a pretty significant development. I mean, they don't like her right now. Not at all. They liked her, I guess, maybe when they thought she had a shot. I mean, they were all over this story. It was so nuts. I mean, imagine a $500 million fine for something that, you know, there's no victim in, that everybody said that they would do again. It made no sense. And yet the irony of everything is that what she was trying to go after Donald Trump for was the very thing that she did. Let's go back to New York Magazine. James did sue Trump, of course, and won for the moment after a circus-like bench trial focused on Trump's habitual overvaluation of his assets and bank loan applications. That was the charge, of course. He says it's worth one thing. Frankly, it's up to the bank, right? Whether or not they take on the loan, because they're the ones that are doing the due diligence. And clearly Deutsche Bank thought it was worth whatever he said it was worth. So you want to call it overvaluation, I would just say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You got to actually sell something in order to actually have it be valued properly. New York State Judge Arthur N. Gorin found Trump civilly liable for fraud and slammed him with damages amounting to over $500 million, including mounting interest. During the trial, James made a series of wildly inappropriate out-of-court statements. This is the New York Magazine that would originally or would ordinarily get a prosecutor fired. At one point, she publicly branded Trump and his family members as liars while they were testifying. Wow, okay? Again, now you may have heard that from me, but it's something when you start hearing it from the liberal media, and they go on to say something that I've pointed out before as well, that her theory of liability was so flimsy that it barely concealed her previously acknowledged motivation to stick one to Trump by any means available. That was the, he's too male, too pale, too stale, that whole bit, right? And how she was going to get him because, well, that was her political job as she sought to get it. The purported fraud victims were multi-billion-dollar banks that were repaid in full on their loans to the Trump organization and made millions of dollars in profits through interest payments. Unsurprisingly, a New York Appellate Division panel voiced pointed skepticism of James's victimless case, and seemed poised either to substantially reduce the verdict or throw it out. Remember, I'm a little perplexed as to why that hasn't happened yet, because we've played this whole thing. But just to remind you, as soon as the attorney for Letitia James, right, comes to the bench there, her name is Judith Vale, they're like on her. They have no use for her.
May it please the court, Judith Vale for the New York Attorney General's office. All of the defendants repeatedly violated—
Ms. Vale, can you identify any previous case in which the Attorney General sued under Executive Law 6312 to upset a private business transaction that was between equally sophisticated partners, where the supposed victim had the ability and legal obligation to discover the allegedly misrepresented matters by conducting its own due diligence, where the supposed wrongdoer advised the supposed victim through written disclaimers to conduct its own due diligence and to draw its own conclusions, where the alleged misrepresentation almost entirely concerned inherently subjective valuations of properties and businesses.
Yes.
And where the victim never complained about any fraud in the transactional losses from it. Because I've gone through the cases which you've cited, and all of them always involved the consumer protection aspect. It involved protection of the market.
Well, several responses.
And I want to add to his question, and little to no impact on the public marketplace.
In other words, why is the state of New York bringing this case? Why would the Attorney General bother herself with this? Again, the judge saying this is a private transaction. What the HELLs are doing in my court?
It was using...
I'm sorry, but what's being described sounds an awful lot like a potential commercial dispute between private actors.
Well, to go back to the first question about whether there's other examples of this, there are other examples of this. In the First American case, the Attorney General brought a 6312 case where the transaction at issue was between a very big bank, Wells Fargo, and a professional appraisal firm.
But it wasn't the concern there that the public would ultimately be negatively impacted and affected by what those corporate actors were doing.
And that concern is here as well, because when you have hidden risks getting injected into the market,
I don't know how
that
you can...
hurts.
Okay, so what's so interesting about all this, right? And she's like, oh, but that's the same concern here because you have these hidden risks getting interjected into the market. I mean, I think the judges would argue that it was a contained risk because it was Deutsche Bank itself and it was one individual client. Right? You can't really go after Donald Trump for that. Again, private transaction between the two of them. Now, when you get over to Letitia Baby was doing something entirely different. Letitia was actually putting taxpayer funds at risk. This is what's so crazy. And this is why you have not just New York Magazine on her right now, but also the Wall Street Journal, which, by the way, lately has absolutely no use for Donald Trump. Have you noticed? I'm looking at the headlines. I'm like, wow, guys, tell us how you really feel. But the Wall Street Journal reporting on it now saying, look, you can't really do this. She was listing a Norfolk, Virginia home as her primary residence as recently as 2023. Saying this. She's trying to say it's a technicality, but I'm looking at a history here because you get a 2001 certificate at a Brooklyn property. They kept year after year after year saying it was 4 levels instead of 5 because that allowed her to get a special, FHA thing as a result. I mean, you're talking about federal funds here, federal funds that she was using. And this is a mess. It's a mess for her. It's now become a grand jury investigation. They have opened that grand jury investigation. They have begun sending subpoenas, and it's so bad. The Eastern District of Virginia just started sending those subpoenas out. That she did this little breakfast the other day in New York, and she had to address it. But she didn't do a very good job at it. And again, you've got all the New York press asking these questions, from New York Magazine to the Wall Street Journal, to the New York Post. New York Post is pretty conservative in general, but Wall Street Journal has no use for Trump right now, but they're like, this is nuts. And New York Magazine, I think, is really, really telling. Anyway, here's her excuse. There's a little bit of vibration, so a little difficult to hear, but let's listen in.
As you know, we filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump and his family. We secured $454 million judgment against him, which is on appeal. The case is on appeal. I have no idea when that case will be decided. This investigation into me is nothing more than retribution. It's baseless. It has to do with the fact that on a power of attorney, I mistakenly indicated that I was a state of Virginia, but prior to that, I had indicated to the mortgage broker that, in fact, in bold cap letters, that I am not a resident of Virginia and never will be. And in the mortgage application, I indicated that I would not live in Virginia and I was not a resident. They just took the power of attorney and they're using that as a basis for enforcement for their investigation, when in reality, the power of attorney was never used to determine my eligibility for.
Okay, you are an attorney. Therefore, that kind of clerical error should never have been made. And when you combine it with some of the other stuff that was going down, Letitia, you're in trouble. And this grand jury investigation is going to look into all of it. You're looking at what, 30 years in the slammer? Violation of 18 U.S.C. 1014, false statements to obtain a federally insured loan. 18 U.S.C. 1001, false statements to the government. She's got problems.
What's your thoughts on Letitia James, Director Polte? According to him, Letitia James says that the alleged mortgage fraud was simply a mistake. I want to get your thoughts on that. She put down that her father was her husband in order, and this is very similar to, I guess, the false attacks they have on here.
Well, I don't know what it is currently, but Letitia James, who's the Attorney General of New York State, it seemed, I'm not involved in that at all. I know it's being handled by various groups, I guess, but it's major fraud, mortgage documents, and fraudulent everything. I think she said the father was her husband, which she had to have a husband, so she chose her father, and she put it down, and she had didn't she sign in Virginia, yet she said she lived in Virginia, yet she's the New York State Attorney General. She did that for tax reasons, so she could take advantage of taxes. And she had the wrong number of units. She had a much different number, which wouldn't have allowed her to qualify and scam the government. So I don't know. I think she's very bad for New York, but I really don't know too much about it, but I appreciate the question. Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
There's no genocide.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You know what? I think he knows more than he's letting on about it. But again, he has to be cautious and careful because this is the DOJ's job to look into this one. And they are looking into it because, she may face 30 years. I mean, incredible, right? Only it's the exact crime that she was trying to go after him for, except that hers is so much more worse. Okay, so here's the document, right? This is, you look at it circled, she said that this is her primary residence, and so the allegation is that she was trying to get a better rate somehow. This is the Norfolk House in Virginia. Then you get the Brownstone in Brooklyn. What are you doing saying you got 4 levels? Oh, because you qualify for a better federal housing assistance. Oh, and then there's that one that you heard Donald Trump mention where she signed on as her father's wife back in 1983 so that they could get this house, this little house together as husband and wife. I mean, come on. You see the history, you see the pattern of lying? She's a lawyer. And by the way, she was already a lawyer back then. And she's signing on as her father's wife? The media has caught on to her and they're like, okay, we got to pick our battles here. I mean, we clearly picked the wrong side with Joe Biden and now we're getting exposed over that one. Maybe we got to be a little bit careful, more careful with Letitia James, Stephen Miller, coming out the other day and just saying, listen, this woman is guilty of multiple serial criminal violations and she's going down.
Letitia James says the allegations against her are nothing more than a revenge tour by the Trump administration. What's your response?
My response is that Letitia James is one of the most corrupt, shameless individuals ever to hold public office. She's guilty not only of those crimes, but of countless more crimes by using and abusing your public office to try to persecute an innocent man, depriving him of his rights, engaging in a conspiracy to obstruct our election, and to overthrow our democratic processes and procedures. She is guilty of multiple significant serial criminal violations.
Serial criminal violations, okay? And now a lot of press in New York is getting kind of upset because the idea is she's going to use taxpayer dollars to defend herself. She hired Hunter Biden's old attorney, Abby Lowell, who cost a pretty penny. And now the GOP there in the Senate in New York is like, I don't think so. You're not going to use taxpayer dollars. Come on. And that was another thing that came up, by the way, in the article. It's New York Magazine. This was nuts. Here's the New York Post saying this proposed use of public money is a gross misuse of taxpayer dollars. It undermines, they're quoting the Republicans here, it undermines public trust in government and sends a troubling message that elected officials and state employees are entitled to publicly funded legal defense, even for matters entirely disconnected from their public responsibilities. And so they're going to the state comptroller and they're like, there's no way that she's going to have access to the $10 million legal slush fund. No way. And this, I think, is important because here, let me put this up on the screen, you guys. This is also from New York Magazine saying this is pretty bad. This is like unbelievable that she's trying to use taxpayer dollars. The writer writes, James has again displayed dubious ethical instincts in her response to the pending inquiry. She has inexplicably chosen to use the resources of her public office to respond to the investigation. James issued a statement through the AG's official spokesperson. She reportedly plans to use state funds, that's taxpayer dollars, to cover some of her legal expenses. What a dreadful idea. By dragging the AG's office into her personal mess, James has made some of her colleagues into potential witnesses and subjected them to subpoenas. Prosecutors might ask the AG spokesperson, for example, what James initially said about the allegations. There's no privilege there, and it's unclear how the AG can justify using New York taxpayer money to fund her criminal personal defense. Okay, so this is wacky. I mean, this woman's something else. You know what I think? I think she's going to have to do exactly what she said Donald Trump should do. Remember? He might just have to sell some of his assets.
4 days after a judge ordered Donald Trump to pay $355 million for a decade of fraud, New York Attorney General Letitia James says she's prepared to do everything she can to make sure the former president pays his fine, including, she told us, seizing the buildings that bear his name.
If he does not have funds to pay off the judgment, then we will seek, judgment enforcement mechanisms in court, and we will ask the judge to seize his assets.
Again, funny twist of fate, right? The irony here. Oh, you want to seize his assets. I think he's going to be seizing yours, or you're going to have to sell some in order to cover your expensive lawyer that used to represent Hunter Biden. Because taxpayers shouldn't be on the hook for that. No, you're going to be out of money. You're going to have to sell that home in Norfolk, Virginia, I would imagine. Maybe the Brooklyn Brownstone in order to cover some of this, because no one wants to pay for your high-priced attorney for your personal matters. Now, the attorney wrote a letter saying this is just political, this is Trump's vendetta, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry. You know what? Maybe those that live in glass houses should not throw stones. Letitia, you're looking at up to 30 years, and Donald Trump has got to be loving every single moment of it.
I can say unrelated to that, she's a disaster for New York. She's a horrible, horrible human being, and I think she's a total crook. There's no question about it, but that's just my opinion. Pam's going to have to do what she wants. She's a very bad person. She's a very, very bad person who campaigned solely on, I'm going to get Donald Trump over and over again. She's a sick person, but that's has nothing to do with what Pam does. Pam is going to do what's right. She always does. I've known her a long time.
Well, the investigation is underway. The Eastern District of Virginia has begun its grand jury subpoenas. So Letitia, watch out. It's about to get extremely, extremely, extremely interesting. Right? You know, maybe she's just not that smart. I think that's part of it. She really isn't that smart. She's a political animal, but not the brightest.